The night the sirens shattered Maplewood's quiet, the rain was coming down in sheets, turning the grocery store parking lot into a mirror of red and blue. Police tape fluttered in the wind, cordoning off the entrance to a place that, until now, had been the heartbeat of a small Ohio town. The world outside was chaos. Neighbors pressed against the tape, cell phones raised, faces pale with fear and curiosity. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed over a scene that would haunt the town for years. It began, as these things often do, with something ordinary. A scream in aisle 7. The sound echoed off the linoleum, sharp and desperate, slicing through the hum of refrigerators and the shuffle of carts. Within minutes, the store was swarming with officers, their radios crackling with urgency. A young black man, hands trembling, was pressed against the hood of a squad car, his face turned away from the crowd. In the shadows, a white man in a green grocery vest watched, his expression unreadable, blending into the background as if he were just another fixture in the store. Maplewood was the kind of place where everyone knew your name, where the grocery store was more than a place to buy bread and milk. It was where lives intersected, where stories were exchanged over the produce bins and checkout lines. For years, the market had been a sanctuary, a place of routine and comfort. But that night, the illusion of safety was shattered. James Harris had always been part of the background. He moved through the store with quiet efficiency, arranging apples and bananas, remembering the preferences of regulars, offering a helping hand to anyone who needed it. He was the kind of worker who made the place run, but who rarely drew attention. For James, invisibility was a kind of armor. In a town where difference was noticed, he learned early that it was safer to keep his head down, to be helpful but never loud, present but never seen. His life outside the store was small but steady. A modest apartment, family photos on the fridge, a mother and younger sister who called every Sunday. He battled anxiety in silence, the weight of it pressing on his chest some mornings so hard he could barely breathe. But he never spoke of it. In his world, mental health was a private struggle, something to be managed alone, never shared. The stigma was real, and the fear of being seen as weak was stronger than the fear itself. The new guy at the store, Ethan Miller, was a different kind of invisible. He worked the night shift, stocking shelves when the aisles were empty, his presence barely registering with customers or co-workers. He was pale, wiry, with a nervous energy that made people uneasy, but in a place where everyone had their quirks, he was just another face in the crowd. Few noticed when he arrived, and fewer still noticed when he left. The night of the murder, the store was nearly empty. The rain kept most people home, and those who braved the weather hurried through their shopping, eager to get back to warmth and safety. James was restocking bananas, humming softly to himself, when a crash echoed from the back of the store. He froze, heart pounding, the familiar surge of anxiety rising in his chest. He told himself it was nothing, just a box falling, maybe Ethan being clumsy. But the feeling lingered, a sense of something wrong just out of sight. By morning, the market was a crime scene. Mrs. Lila Grant, a beloved regular, was found in the alley behind the store, her groceries scattered. Her life ended in a moment of violence that made no sense. The town reeled. Maplewood had always felt safe, insulated from the darkness that seemed to haunt other places. Now that illusion was gone. The investigation moved quickly but not carefully. The police, under pressure to deliver answers, focused on the most visible suspect. James, who had been working that night, became the center of their attention. His presence, his silence, his difference, all became evidence in the eyes of a community desperate for someone to blame. The pain of suspicion was sharp, but the deeper wound was the invisibility of his suffering. No one asked how he was coping, what he had seen, or how the weight of accusation pressed on his mind. His pain was invisible, dismissed, a shadow in the background. As the days passed, the story spread beyond Maplewood. News vans parked outside the store, reporters eager for a headline. Social media lit up with speculation, some supportive, most suspicious. The narrative was set before the facts were known. In the break room, co-workers whispered, their glances lingering a little too long. At home, James's phone buzzed with messages, some from friends, others from strangers, all asking the same question. Was he the Maplewood killer? The true killer, meanwhile, remained hidden in plain sight. Ethan continued his shifts, blending into the background, his oddness now a shield. No one looked at him twice. The police, satisfied with their suspect, missed the signs, the nervous glances, the stains on his uniform, the way he avoided the cameras. The town's fear had a face, and it wasn't his. In the weeks that followed, the pain in Maplewood deepened. The market reopened, but the sense of safety was gone. James returned to work, his movements slower, his eyes wary. The whispers followed him through the aisles, a constant reminder that in this town, some wounds never heal. The stigma of mental health, the invisibility of black pain, the ease with which suspicion settled on his shoulders, all became part of the story that Maplewood tried and failed to forget. But beneath the surface, something darker was stirring. The real killer was still out there, watching, waiting, blending into the background. And as the town tried to move on, another scream would soon echo through the aisles, shattering what little peace remained. The days after Mrs. Grant's murder stretched out, heavy and gray, as if the town itself was holding its breath. Maplewood Market reopened, but the air inside was different now, thicker, tense, as if the walls themselves remembered. The regulars returned, but their conversations were quieter, their eyes darting to corners and shadows. The produce aisle, once a place of cheerful greetings and casual gossip, became a corridor of suspicion. James Harris moved through the store like a ghost. He kept his head down, his hands busy, but he could feel the weight of every glance, every whispered conversation that stopped when he passed. The pain of being suspected was sharp, but the deeper ache was the knowledge that his fear, his anxiety, his sleepless nights were invisible to those around him. He was present but unseen, his suffering dismissed as easily as a smudge on a window. At home, the silence was suffocating. The television flickered with news reports about the murder, the anchors' voices flat and distant. Social media was worse, a storm of speculation and accusation, his name and face circulating in posts and comments, each one a fresh wound. His mother called every night, her voice tight with worry, but there was little comfort to be found. The stigma of mental health in his community was a wall he could not climb. He kept his therapy appointment secret, the shame of needing help almost as heavy as the fear itself. The police investigation pressed on, but its focus remained narrow. The detectives returned to the store, asking the same questions, looking for cracks in James's story. They combed through security footage, but the cameras in the back hallway had been broken for weeks, a detail that seemed to matter only to James. The officers' questions grew sharper, their patience thinner. The pressure to find a culprit was mounting, and James was the easiest answer. Ethan Miller, meanwhile, continued to slip through the cracks. He worked his shifts, his presence barely registering with customers or co-workers. He was always in motion, always just out of focus. The stains on his uniform were dismissed as carelessness, his nervous energy as harmless oddity. No one noticed when he lingered near the loading dock, or when he left the store just before closing, his eyes scanning the parking lot for something, or someone. The town's fear began to curdle into anger. The mayor called a town hall meeting, urging calm, but the crowd was restless. Some demanded more police patrols, others whispered about locking their doors and arming themselves. The pain of loss was raw, but the fear of the unknown was worse. In the absence of answers, suspicion became a kind of comfort, a way to make sense of the senseless. James felt the change most acutely at work. The camaraderie of the break room was gone, replaced by a brittle politeness. Co-workers who once joked with him now kept their distance, their conversations clipped and careful. The manager, Mr. Lopez, watched him with a new wariness, his friendly tone edged with doubt. Even the customers seemed different. Some offered awkward smiles, others avoided his gaze altogether. The market, once a place of belonging, had become a minefield. One evening, as James was closing up, he noticed something strange. The back door, usually locked tight, was ajar. A cold draft slipped in, carrying with it the scent of rain and something metallic. He hesitated, heart pounding, then pushed the door open. The alley was empty, but a set of muddy footprints led away from the threshold, disappearing into the darkness. He reported it to Mr. Lopez, but the concern was brushed aside. Probably just a delivery driver, he was told. But James couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next morning, the news broke. Another body had been found. This time it was a young woman, a college student who worked part-time at the bakery. She had been closing up alone, her car parked in the far corner of the lot. The details were eerily similar: her throat slashed, her belongings scattered, a single grocery bag left behind. The town's fear erupted into panic. The police presence doubled, but so did the rumors. Some whispered about a curse, others about a copycat. But most looked to James, their suspicion now tinged with desperation. The investigation intensified. Detectives scoured the store, questioning every employee, reviewing every scrap of footage. James was called in again, his answers scrutinized, his alibi dissected. The pressure was suffocating. He began to doubt himself, replaying every moment of that night, searching for something he might have missed. The anxiety grew, a storm in his chest that left him breathless and exhausted. Ethan meanwhile remained invisible. He worked his shifts, his eyes always on the floor, his movements quick and precise. He avoided the police, slipping out the back whenever they arrived. No one questioned his absences. No one noticed when he changed his schedule, trading shifts with co-workers who were too distracted to care. He was a shadow moving through the store unnoticed. The community's pain deepened. The market became a place of mourning, flowers and candles piled up near the entrance, notes of condolence taped to the windows. The faces of the victims stared out from flyers and news reports, their smiles a stark contrast to the fear that now gripped the town. The sense of safety was gone, replaced by a brittle vigilance. Parents walked their children to school, neighbors checked in on each other, but the trust that once bound Maplewood together was fraying. James's world shrank. He stopped going out after dark, stopped answering calls from friends who didn't know what to say. The therapy sessions became a lifeline, a place where he could speak the truth of his fear and pain. But even there, the stigma lingered, a voice in his head that whispered he was weak, that he should be able to handle it on his own. The weight of expectation was crushing. One night, unable to sleep, James sat by his window watching the rain streak down the glass. The street below was empty, the only movement the flicker of a street lamp in the wind. He thought about the victims, about the lives cut short, about the families left behind. He wondered if anyone would remember their names a year from now, or if they would become just another headline, another cautionary tale. As the days passed, the investigation began to shift. Detective Sanders, one of the few officers who seemed to see James as more than a suspect, started to ask different questions. She reviewed the security footage again, this time focusing on the gaps, the moments when Ethan was unaccounted for, the times when the cameras mysteriously malfunctioned. She noticed patterns in the schedule, in the shifts traded at the last minute, in the deliveries that arrived late at night. A breakthrough came when a maintenance worker found a discarded grocery vest behind the store, stained with something dark and sticky. The vest was Ethan's, his name tag still attached. The police tested the stains, blood, matching the latest victim. The narrative began to unravel. The focus shifted, slowly at first, then with gathering speed. Ethan was brought in for questioning, his answers evasive, his alibi full of holes. The evidence mounted, a trail of receipts, surveillance footage from nearby businesses, a collection of women's jewelry found in his apartment. The town's relief was palpable, but for James, the damage was done. The suspicion, the isolation, the invisible pain had left scars that would not heal easily. The community tried to make amends, apologies were offered, support was extended, but the trust was gone. The stigma of mental health, the ease with which suspicion had settled on his shoulders, the invisibility of his suffering, all remained. Maplewood tried to move on. The market reopened, the flowers and candles were cleared away, the routines resumed. But beneath the surface, the fear lingered. The knowledge that evil could hide in plain sight, that pain could go unseen, that justice could be so easily derailed, these truths haunted the town. As the weeks passed, a sense of normalcy returned. James continued to work, his movements slower, his eyes wary. The whispers faded, replaced by a cautious respect. But the nights were still long, the anxiety still sharp. He wondered if he would ever feel safe again, if the market would ever be just a store, if his pain would ever be seen. But as Maplewood settled into its uneasy peace, a new shadow crept in. Unnoticed, a figure watched from the edge of the parking lot, eyes cold and calculating. The real story, it seemed, was not yet over. Another scream would soon echo through the aisles, and the town would once again be forced to confront the darkness within. The weeks after Ethan Miller's arrest brought a strange, uneasy quiet to Maplewood. The headlines faded, the news vans packed up, and the police presence at the market slowly dwindled. For the first time in months, the town exhaled. But the relief was thin, brittle, and beneath it, something darker lingered. The market tried to reclaim its old rhythm. The produce bins were restocked, the floors polished, the windows washed until they gleamed. Customers returned, but their laughter was softer, their conversations cautious. The memory of violence clung to the aisles like a stubborn stain. The staff moved with a new wariness, glancing over their shoulders, locking the doors a little earlier each night. James Harris felt the change most of all. The suspicion that had once followed him everywhere had faded, replaced by a kind of awkward sympathy. Co-workers who had avoided him now offered small gestures of kindness. A cup of coffee left on his locker, a nod of acknowledgement in the break room. The manager, Mr. Lopez, tried to make amends, giving James the best shifts, praising his work in front of the team. But the damage was done. The trust that had once made the market feel like home was gone, replaced by a brittle truce. At home, James struggled to find peace. The therapy sessions continued, but the anxiety was different now. Less about being accused, more about being seen. The town's apology was public, but the private wounds remained. He found himself replaying the events of the past months, searching for signs he might have missed, clues that could have saved lives. The guilt was a constant companion, whispering that he should have done more, should have spoken up sooner, should have trusted his instincts. The community, too, was changed. The stigma of mental health, once an unspoken rule, became a topic of conversation. The local church hosted support groups, the library organized talks on trauma and healing, and the school district brought in counselors for students and staff. But the conversations were tentative, fragile, as if everyone was afraid to look too closely at the pain beneath the surface. The families of the victims struggled to move on. Memorials were held, scholarships established in their names, but the loss was a wound that would not close. The market became a place of pilgrimage, the site of both grief and resilience. Flowers and notes still appeared at the entrance, reminders that the pain was not forgotten. Ethan's trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming: bloodstains, stolen jewelry, surveillance footage. The town watched as the details emerged, each revelation a fresh shock. Ethan had been hiding in plain sight, his oddness a mask for something far more sinister. The verdict was unanimous: guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. For a moment, it seemed as if Maplewood might finally heal. The market sales rebounded, the staff began to smile again, and the town's routines slowly returned. But beneath the surface, the fear remained. The knowledge that evil could hide in the most ordinary places, that pain could go unseen, that justice could be so easily derailed, these truths haunted the town. James tried to move forward. He took on more hours at the market, volunteered at the local food bank, and started running in the mornings, the rhythm of his footsteps a small comfort. He found solace in small routines: brewing coffee, watering his plants, calling his mother every Sunday. But the nights were still long, the anxiety still sharp. He wondered if he would ever feel safe again, if the market would ever be just a store, if his pain would ever be seen. As the weeks passed, a new unease crept in. Small things at first: a door left ajar, a light flickering in the stockroom, a shadow moving just out of sight. James dismissed them as nerves, the residue of trauma. But the feeling grew, a sense of being watched, of something lurking at the edge of his vision. One evening, as James was closing up, he noticed a car idling in the far corner of the parking lot. The headlights were off, the windows tinted. He watched it for a moment, heart pounding, then turned away, telling himself it was nothing. But the car was there again the next night and the night after that. Always in the same spot, always silent, always watching. The staff began to whisper. Some said it was just a customer waiting for someone, others joked about ghosts. But the fear was real, a low hum beneath every conversation. The market security cameras, recently repaired, caught glimpses of the car, but the license plate was always obscured, the driver's face hidden in shadow. James reported the car to Mr. Lopez, who promised to call the police. But when the officers arrived, the car was gone, leaving only tire tracks in the gravel. The sense of unease deepened. James started to take different routes home, checking over his shoulder, locking his doors twice. The anxiety that had once been a private struggle was now a constant, public presence. The community's wounds began to reopen. Rumors spread. Was there another killer? Had Ethan acted alone? The police assured the town that the case was closed, but the fear was contagious. The market's customers dwindled, the staff grew restless, and the sense of safety that had once defined Maplewood was gone. One night, as James was leaving the store, he found a note tucked under his windshield wiper. The paper was damp from the rain, the handwriting jagged and hurried. It read, "You're not safe. He's still out there." James's hands shook as he read the words, the fear settling in his bones. He showed the note to the police, but they dismissed it as a prank, a cruel joke in a town still on edge. But James knew better. The feeling of being watched, the car in the parking lot, the small disturbances at the market, they were not coincidences. He began to keep a journal, recording every detail, every suspicion, every moment of unease. The act of writing was a small comfort, a way to make sense of the chaos. As the days grew shorter and the nights colder, the sense of dread intensified. James started to see the car everywhere, parked outside his apartment, idling at the end of his street, following him on his morning runs. He tried to tell himself it was paranoia, the residue of trauma, but the fear was real. One evening, as he was locking up the market, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned, heart racing, but the alley was empty. He hurried to his car, fumbling with his keys, the sense of being watched pressing in on him. As he drove home, he checked his mirrors constantly, the headlights of the car behind him too close, too bright. At home, James double-locked the door, pulled the curtains tight, and sat in the dark, listening to the sounds of the night. Every creak, every gust of wind, every distant siren set his nerves on edge. He tried to sleep, but the fear kept him awake, his mind racing with possibilities. The next morning he found another note, this one taped to his front door. The message was simple: "You can't hide." The letters were cut from magazines, the edges jagged, the meaning unmistakable. James called the police again, but they found no fingerprints, no evidence, nothing to suggest who might be behind the threats. The market staff grew more anxious. Some quit, unable to handle the fear. Others banded together, walking to their cars in groups, checking in on each other after shifts. The sense of community that had once defined Maplewood was now a shield against the unknown. James's journal grew thicker, the pages filled with observations, suspicions, and fears. He began to notice patterns, times when the car appeared, places where the notes were left, moments when he felt most vulnerable. He shared his findings with Detective Sanders, who listened carefully, her face grave. She promised to investigate, but the leads were thin, the evidence scarce. As the holidays approached, the market decorated its windows with lights and garlands, trying to recapture the spirit of the season. But the joy was forced, the laughter brittle. The fear was always present, a shadow at the edge of every celebration. One night, as James was closing up, he heard a noise in the stockroom, a soft, deliberate sound like someone moving boxes. He froze, listening, his heart pounding. The store was supposed to be empty. He crept toward the sound, every nerve on edge. The lights flickered, casting long shadows across the floor. In the darkness he saw a figure, tall, thin, face obscured by a hood. The figure turned, just for a moment, and James caught a glimpse of cold, empty eyes. The fear was paralyzing, a wave of terror that rooted him to the spot. The figure slipped out the back door, disappearing into the night. James called the police, his voice shaking. They arrived quickly, searching the store and the alley, but found nothing. The security cameras had been disabled, the footage erased. The only evidence was a single, muddy footprint, leading away from the door. The next day, another note appeared, this one inside James's locker at the market. The message was chilling: "You're next." James's world shrank to a point of fear and vigilance. He stopped running, stopped volunteering, stopped answering calls. The anxiety that had once been a private struggle was now a constant, public presence. The market became a fortress, the staff on edge, the customers wary. But the fear was not enough to keep the darkness at bay. As the year drew to a close, Maplewood braced itself for what was to come. The real killer was still out there, watching, waiting, blending into the background. And as the town tried to move on, another scream would soon echo through the aisles, shattering what little peace remained. Winter settled over Maplewood with a heavy, suffocating silence. The snow came early, blanketing the town in white, muffling the sounds of daily life. The market's windows glowed with holiday lights, but inside the air was thick with unease. The staff moved through their routines with forced cheer, their eyes darting to shadows, their laughter brittle. The fear that had haunted the town for months had become a constant companion, woven into every conversation, every glance, every hurried step to a waiting car. James Harris felt the weight of it most of all. The notes, the car, the shadow in the stockroom, each new threat had chipped away at his sense of safety, until all that remained was vigilance and exhaustion. He slept in fits, waking at every creak and gust of wind, his mind replaying the warnings, the footsteps, the cold, empty eyes. The market, once a place of comfort, had become a stage for his nightmares. He tried to keep moving, to hold on to the routines that had once anchored him. He brewed coffee in the mornings, watered his plants, called his mother every Sunday. But the world felt smaller now, the walls closing in. The therapy sessions continued, but the words felt hollow, the comfort distant. The stigma of his pain lingered, a silent accusation that he should be stronger, braver, less afraid. The community too was unraveling. The market's customers dwindled, the staff grew thin. The police increased their patrols, but the sense of safety was gone. The town's conversations circled endlessly around the same questions. Who was behind the threats? Why hadn't the police caught them? Would Maplewood ever be safe again? The answers were always just out of reach, lost in the fog of fear and suspicion. Then, on a bitterly cold night in January, the tension snapped. James was closing up the market alone, the last of the staff having left early to beat the snowstorm. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, sending flurries of snow swirling across the parking lot. He moved through the aisles, checking locks, turning off lights, his footsteps echoing in the empty store. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hum of the refrigerators and the distant wail of a siren. As he reached the back of the store, he noticed the door to the stockroom was ajar. A thin line of light spilled into the hallway, flickering as if someone had passed in front of it. James's heart pounded. He hesitated, every instinct screaming at him to leave, to call for help, to run. But something deeper, pride, anger, exhaustion, pushed him forward. He stepped into the stockroom, the cold air biting at his skin. The room was a mess. Boxes overturned, shelves askew, a trail of muddy footprints leading to the emergency exit. The door was propped open, snow drifting in, melting on the concrete floor. James followed the footprints, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts. Outside, the world was silent. The parking lot was empty, the snow unbroken except for the trail leading away from the door. James followed it, his footsteps crunching in the darkness. The trail led to the far corner of the lot, to the same spot where the car had always waited. But tonight the car was gone. In its place, a single blood-red envelope sat atop the snow. James picked it up, his hands shaking. Inside was a photograph, grainy, black and white, taken from a distance. It showed him, standing in the market's doorway, looking out into the night. On the back, a message was scrawled in jagged letters: "You survived. But not everyone will." The fear was overwhelming, a wave of panic that left him gasping. He stumbled back to the store, locked the doors, and called the police. They arrived quickly, searching the lot, dusting the envelope for prints, reviewing the security footage. But as always, there was nothing. No evidence, no witnesses, no answers. The next day the market was closed. The staff gathered in the break room, their faces drawn, their voices hushed. Mr. Lopez announced that the store would be shutting down for a week, maybe longer. The fear had become too much, the risk too great. The market, the heart of Maplewood, was closing its doors. James went home, the weight of defeat heavy on his shoulders. He sat by his window watching the snow fall, the world outside silent and still. He thought about the victims, about the lives lost, about the pain that had gone unseen for so long. He wondered if the town would ever heal, if he would ever feel safe again. But as the days passed, something shifted. The community, fractured by fear, began to come together. Neighbors checked in on each other, shared meals, offered rides. The church opened its doors to those who needed shelter, the library hosted support groups, the school organized counseling for students and staff. The conversations about mental health, once whispered, became louder, more urgent. The stigma began to crack, replaced by a fragile but growing sense of solidarity. James found comfort in these small acts of kindness. He volunteered at the food bank, helped shovel snow for elderly neighbors, joined a support group at the library. The pain was still there, the fear still sharp, but he was no longer alone. The community's wounds were deep, but they were healing, slowly, painfully, together. The police continued their investigation, but the trail was cold. The notes stopped, the car disappeared, the shadow in the stockroom never returned. The market reopened, its windows bright with spring flowers, its aisles filled with laughter once more. The fear lingered, but it no longer defined the town. James moved forward step by step. He kept his journal, recording his thoughts, his fears, his hopes. He spoke openly about his anxiety, his therapy, his journey. Others listened, some for the first time, and shared their own stories. The invisibility of black pain, the stigma of mental health, the wounds of suspicion and fear, all became part of the town's story, no longer hidden, no longer ignored. As winter melted into spring, Maplewood began to heal. The market thrived, the community grew stronger, the memory of the murders became a lesson, a warning, a call to see and care for one another. The darkness had not won. The pain had not been in vain. But on the first warm night of April, as James walked home beneath the budding trees, he felt a familiar chill. He paused, listening to the quiet, the distant sound of laughter, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. For a moment he thought he saw a shadow move at the edge of the light, a figure watching, waiting, blending into the background. James kept walking, his head high, his steps steady. The fear was still there, but so was the strength he had found, the community that had rallied, the hope that had survived. The story was not over, but neither was he. And as the lights of Maplewood Market glowed in the distance, a single unseen pair of eyes watched from the darkness, the promise of peace as fragile as the dawn. In the end, the story of Maplewood isn't just about a town haunted by fear or a man forced to carry the weight of suspicion and pain. It's about all of us, about the choices we make when darkness creeps close to home. What would you have done if it were your son pressed against that squad car, his pain invisible to the world? What if it were your neighbor, your friend, your city unraveling under the weight of fear and silence? Would you have seen what others missed? Would you have spoken up, reached out, demanded better? Drop it in the comments. We all like to believe we do the right thing. But the truth is, justice and compassion require more than good intentions. They demand courage, vigilance, and the willingness to see what's uncomfortable. If this story shook something in you, share it. Stories like this need light. Because only when we face the darkness together can we hope to change what comes next.